It's the Side Quest Podcast.
When you think about the British monarchy, there is this almost ingrained expectation of absolute architectural invulnerability.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. It operates like a fortress. Like if you are born behind the gates of Buckingham Palace, you're immediately wrapped in 1,000 years of tradition, endless layers of protocol, and an institution that essentially points to you and says, you are untouchable.
Yeah, and it's not just a perception either. I mean, it's a deliberate design. The entire apparatus of the crown is built to project this flawless stability.
Right, because they need the pageantry to be perfect.
Exactly. The hierarchy has to be unquestionable because that permanence acts as a shield against the chaos of the outside world.
But then I want you to step into the reality of a modest, rather isolated Norfolk farmhouse. The morning of February 19th, 2026.
Wow. Yeah.
Plainclothes detectives pull up in unmarked cars. There is no pageantry here. There are no trumpets. And suddenly, for the first time in almost 400 years, literally since King Charles I lost his head, a senior British royal is arrested.
It's just wild.
That fortress isn't just breached. It is fundamentally shattered.
It really represents a structural collapse of royal immunity that it defies modern comparison. And when you look at the paper trail that led to that farmhouse, the court depositions, the police updates, the raw interview transcripts, you realize this wasn't some overnight collapse.
No.
It was a slow-motion detonation, decades in the making.
Which brings us to our mission for today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are going to build out the definitive, comprehensive timeline of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
Yes, let's get into it.
We are looking strictly at the primary sources, the raw documentation that has surfaced over the last 25 years, to understand the exact mechanics of this downfall. We want to know, how does a man born a prince of the realm, the reported favorite son of Queen Elizabeth II, a decorated Falklands War helicopter pilot?
A literal war hero at one point.
Right. How does he end up an exiled criminal suspect stripped of all his titles? And just to set the ground rules for us today, we're dealing with massive data dumps from the Trump administration's Transparency Acts, Democrat-led House Oversight Committees, and the current UK Labour government.
A lot of different political sources.
Yeah, exactly. So we aren't here to play politics or endorse any side's narrative. We're just going to look at the cold, hard documents and follow the evidence wherever it leads.
And, following the evidence means we have to look at the anatomy of power. We are going to examine the psychology of institutional blindness, the highly complex legal maneuvers used in both U.S. and U.K. courts, and the specific paper trail that finally brought the police to his door.
Let's start at the true origin point then. Because to understand the arrest in 2026, you have to rewind all the way back to 1999.
That's where it all begins.
Yeah, and I look at this date, and the immediate question that jumps out is, how does a British prince even intersect with an American financier who would later be exposed as a prolific sex trafficker?
Right. They seem like they belong in totally different universes. But the documents consistently point to one specific bridge between those two worlds, and that is Ghislaine Maxwell.
Ah, okay.
To understand how Andrew ends up in Jeffrey Epstein's orbit, you really have to understand her role as a social facilitator. She was the daughter of the disgraced British media mogul Robert Maxwell, and she had spent years deeply embedding herself in the highest echelons of society across New York, London, Palm Beach.
But she was well connected.
Extremely. But crucially, she was already a fixture in Andrew's social circle. She had known him since her university days in the UK.
So she acts as the ultimate guarantor of trust.
Exactly.
If you're Andrew, you aren't just meeting some random American billionaire. You're being introduced to a friend of a trusted, longtime confidant. But I want you to picture the reality of Jeffrey Epstein in 1999. He isn't just rich.
No, it's beyond rich.
It's insane. He presents a facade of almost unimaginable comic book level wealth. Our sources detail a 9-story Manhattan townhouse, reputedly the largest private single-family residence in New York City at the time.
Wow.
He has a sprawling Palm Beach estate, a ranch in New Mexico, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands called Little St. James, and a fleet of private jets, including the Boeing 727 that the press would later dub the Lolita Express.
And it's the sheer scale of the illusion that is so critical to understand here. Epstein wasn't just wealthy, he actively cultivated an ecosystem of power. He collected people,
Like trophies almost.
pretty much, politicians, Nobel laureate scientists, celebrities, and of course, royalty. He used that proximity to power as a dual-purpose tool. I mean, it was social currency, yes, but it was primarily a protective cover.
Right.
Beneath the veneer of these intellectual dinner parties, he was actively running a sprawling network of sexual exploitation and trafficking.
But I want to push back on Andrew's own stated motives for a second. Because years later, when he was forced to explain this relationship on BBC Newsnight, he claimed it had nothing to do with partying.
Oh, right, the networking defense.
Yeah. He framed it almost as a professional networking exercise. He said he was transitioning out of the Royal Navy, preparing to become the UK's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment, and he viewed Epstein as this, brilliant convener of minds.
He specifically called Epstein's home a railway station of extraordinary people.
A railway station.
Yeah, that was his exact phrase. He claimed he wanted to learn about international business, and Epstein was the master key to that network. He argued that he went into the friendship looking to learn, not looking for anything untoward.
Okay, but let's be real about the railway station defense for a minute. Andrew claimed he never saw anything suspicious because there were just so many staff and people constantly moving through these massive properties.
Right.
But frankly, that logic completely falls apart when you look at the sheer volume of young women Epstein had around him. It's like standing in the middle of a burning building, seeing people running around frantically with buckets of water and convincing yourself, well, it's just a highly unorganized car wash.
That's a great way to put it.
You are seeing the activity, you are entirely immersed in it, but you are actively choosing to misinterpret what it actually means.
And that's the exact mechanism of weaponized proximity we were talking about. Epstein didn't just want famous friends for his own ego. Having a British prince sleeping in your guest room, flying on your jets, and attending your parties provides the ultimate shield of legitimacy.
It really does.
Think about it from the perspective of anyone who might start to get suspicious of Epstein's activities. The immediate counterthought is, well, the Queen's son stays there. It must be legitimate. It completely neutralizes suspicion.
And the integration was absolute. Andrew didn't just visit occasionally. He flew on the jets, he vacationed on the private island. He brought Epstein right into the heart of the British royal establishment.
He really did.
In 2000, he invited Epstein to Windsor Castle and Sandringham. He hosted a shooting weekend for Ghislaine Maxwell's birthday. But the true documentation of this integration comes a year later, in 2001, with a photograph that has become arguably the most consequential image in modern royal history.
The Belgravia photograph.
Yes, taken at Ghislaine Maxwell's London townhouse in Belgravia. It shows Andrew with his arm wrapped around the bare waist of a 17-year-old girl named Virginia Roberts, who we know today is Virginia Jeffery.
And standing right there in the background.
Yeah, smiling directly at the camera is Ghislaine Maxwell.
We are definitely going to talk a lot more about Andrew's bizarre attempts to explain away that photograph later on.
Oh, for sure.
But for now, you just have to look at this image from 2001. You have this deep integration into Epstein's life. Andrew's initial defense hinges on ignorance. He didn't know. He didn't see anything. But in the mid-2000s, that landscape shifts completely.
Because the ignorance excuse runs out of runway.
Exactly. Feigned ignorance is no longer an option because the sirens start blaring loudly and publicly.
Right. We hit 2005, and the illusion shatters. A parent in Palm Beach, Florida, contacts the local police to report that Epstein has sexually abused their 14-year-old daughter.
Just horrifying.
And when detectives actually start digging, they don't find a single isolated incident. They uncover a highly organized, deliberate sex trafficking operation.
Our sources from the Palm Beach police investigation are just chillin'. Epstein was systematically recruiting vulnerable young women and teenage girls, often paying them to give him massages, which, invariably escalated into sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And it was structured like a pyramid scheme. Some victims were paid to recruit other victims. It had been running for years.
Which triggers a massive federal investigation. And this is where we really have to look closely at the legal mechanics of what happens next, because it directly impacts Andrew and everyone else in Epstein's orbit.
Right.
This investigation culminates in the 2007 plea deal negotiated largely by then U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta. Legal scholars in our sources uniformly describe this as one of the most controversial and, frankly, baffling non-prosecution agreements in American legal history.
And I need you to explain how this deal actually functioned because looking at the terms, it just doesn't make any sense. Epstein is facing federal trafficking charges, and somehow he walks away pleading guilty to just two state-level charges.
Right, procuring a person under 18 for prostitution and soliciting prostitution.
And he gets a 13-month sentence in a county jail. Plus, he's allowed out 6 days a week on a work release program to go to his office. How does the justice system even allow that?
Well, the justification at the time from the prosecution was that they weren't sure the victims would hold up under cross-examination at a federal trial, so they took a guaranteed conviction, even an incredibly light one.
But that's not even the worst part.
No, the truly shocking part of the Acosta deal, the part that effectively shielded Epstein's entire network, was a specific clause granting broad federal immunity from prosecution,
Wow.
not just for Epstein, but for any unnamed co-conspirators.
Named co-conspirators. So anyone who participated, facilitated, or benefited from his trafficking network was suddenly protected by a blanket of federal immunity without ever having to be publicly identified or face a trial.
Precisely. And the victims were entirely sidelined. I mean, federal law requires victims to be consulted or at least informed about plea agreements. But in this case, many victims didn't even know this deal had been struck until years later.
That's devastating.
It effectively locked away the truth, sealed the documents, and protected Epstein's powerful connections, including Andrew, for another decade.
So Epstein serves his incredibly lenient sentence. He is convicted in 2008 and becomes a registered sex offender. Now, put yourself in the shoes of any public figure at this moment, let alone a senior member of the British royal family.
Right.
Your friend is a convicted sex offender. The obvious, immediate, and only logical move is to sever ties permanently, right? You delete the number, you distance yourself, you never look back.
Absolutely.
But fast forward to December 2010, Epstein has been released. What does Andrew do? He flies to New York and stays at Epstein's massive Manhattan mansion.
He stays at the mansion for several days. And when the press eventually catches wind of this, Andrew's defense is, well, from a psychological and crisis management standpoint, it is a fascinating case study in delusion.
It really is.
He claims he flew to New York with the sole honorable purpose of ending the friendship in person.
The chicken's way defense.
Right. He said he had advisors telling him to just cut contact over the phone, but he felt that was the chicken's way of doing it. He believed that doing it face-to-face was like a show of leadership.
But hold on. The actions completely contradict the stated intent. If you fly across the Atlantic to break up with a registered sex offender, you meet them in a neutral location, you have a 5-minute conversation, and you leave.
Exactly.
You do not use their sprawling mansion as a convenient hotel. He actually admitted later that he stayed there because it was convenient. It's an absurd rationale.
And while he's staying at this convenient location, the two men are photographed strolling together, deep in conversation through Central Park, a prince of the realm, openly walking with a convicted pedophile.
Unbelievable.
The public outcry was immediate and massive, and Andrew's overarching defense for this catastrophic misadventure, he claimed his judgment was colored by his tendency to be too honorable.
That phrase just stops you in your track. Too honorable.
Too honorable. It reveals a profound institutional blindness. How does a man surrounded by private secretaries, advisors, and elite protection officers end up making an error in judgment this severe?
Claiming you are too honorable to break up with a sex trafficker over the phone shows a total disconnect from the moral reality of Epstein's crimes.
Yeah.
It suggests that in Andrew's mind, the rules of aristocratic etiquette, the polite way to end a friendship among gentlemen, somehow superseded the reality that his host was systematically losing children.
It's the bubble. When you are told your entire life that your judgment is flawless and your status protects you, you completely lose the ability to accurately gauge risk. But while he's strolling in the park, assuming his status will just smooth everything over, the real danger is quietly brewing in the civil courts.
Because the victims didn't just go away.
No, the victims who were silenced by that 2007 plea deal haven't given up. They are mobilizing. Between 2011 and 2015, the allegations began to crystallize into formal legal documents. Court filings connected to ongoing lawsuits by Epstein's victims officially named Virginia Roberts Giuffre as an accuser.
And her allegations regarding Andrew were incredibly specific.
Extremely. She alleged that she was explicitly trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell and forced to have sexual encounters with Andrew on at least 3 distinct occasions.
3 times.
Once in London, at Maxwell's house in Belgravia, the night the 2001 photo was taken when she was 17. A second time at Epstein's Manhattan mansion. And a third time on Epstein's private island in the Virgin Islands.
And Buckingham Palace, of course, deployed their standard crisis response, which is absolute categorical denial. They stated the allegations were categorically untrue, and while they acknowledged the friendship with Epstein was a matter of regret, they insisted the specific allegations against the prince were entirely without foundation.
But the clock is ticking on Epstein. The Me Too movement changes the cultural landscape. Investigative journalists start tearing into the 2007 Acosta deal, and federal prosecutors in New York finally move. In July 2019, Epstein is rearrested on federal sex trafficking charges. He is held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, and the world is bracing for a trial that will inevitably drag all of his powerful associates, including Andrew, onto the witness stand. And then, on August 10th, 2019, Epstein is found dead in his cell, ruled a suicide by hanging.
Epstein's death was a massive, devastating blow to the pursuit of justice. I mean, it robbed the survivors of their day in court. But from a purely investigative standpoint, it voided the criminal trial. There would be no subpoenas forcing his associates to testify under oath about what they saw.
So Epstein is dead. The spotlight is violently swinging around, looking for whoever is left. And in the immediate aftermath of this, Andrew and his communications team make a PR decision that our sources indicate historians will study for decades as an absolute masterclass in self-destruction.
Oh, the Newsnight interview.
Yes. They invite the BBC's flagship current affairs program, Newsnight, into Buckingham Palace for an on-camera, no-holds-barred interview with veteran journalist Emily Maitlis.
Broadcast in November 2019. The strategic intent, apparently, was to draw a line under the scandal, to clear the air and project transparency. But you have to understand how fundamentally flawed this premise is when dealing with allegations of this magnitude. You cannot PR your way out of a sex trafficking scandal.
Let's look at the actual mechanics of this interview, because the specific alibis he offered are staggering. Emily Maitlis corners him on the specific details of Jeffrey's allegations. Jeffrey claims they first met and danced at Tramp nightclub in London on March 10, 2001, that he bought her drinks, and they went back to Maxwell's house.
And Andrew's defense.
He claims he couldn't have been there because he was at a Pizza Express in Woking.
A suburban pizza chain.
A pizza chain. He claimed he had taken his daughter, Princess Beatrice, to a birthday party there at around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And when pressed on how he could remember this one specific day almost 2 decades later, he insisted it was because going to Pizza Express in Woking was a very unusual thing for him to do.
Right. He remembered it weirdly distinctly.
Exactly. He then claimed he spent the rest of the evening at home.
But Maitlis doesn't stop there. She brings up another hyper-specific detail from Jeffrey. Jeffrey said that while they were dancing at the club, Andrew was sweating profusely.
Oh, the sweating defense.
Yes, Andrew counters this with what must be the most bizarre medical defense ever broadcast on global television, the anadromous defense. He claimed he had a peculiar medical condition at the time that meant he physically could not sweat.
I couldn't believe it when I read the transcript.
He stated he had suffered an overdose of adrenaline while being shot at in the Falklands War in the 1980s, which made it almost impossible for him to sweat. He framed it as a mechanical failure of his biology.
Right.
Medical experts immediately pointed out that while anadromous is real, framing it as a permanent result of a trauma-induced adrenaline overdose decades prior is highly medically implausible.
And then comes the 2001 photograph.
Yeah.
The undeniable visual evidence of his arm around her waist. Maitlis shows it to him. And instead of acknowledging it, he tries to cast doubt on its very existence.
He claims he has absolutely no memory of the photograph being taken. He suggests it might have been manipulated or faked. He argues that because it's a photograph of a photograph of a photograph, nobody can prove its authenticity. But the most telling part of his denial is his reasoning for why it couldn't be him. It wasn't a denial based on recognizing the room or the lighting. It was based on his outfit.
Yes. He looks at the casual clothes he's wearing in the photo and says, well, when I go out in London, I wear a suit and a tie. He describes the clothes in the picture as his traveling clothes.
It's so absurd.
He is essentially arguing that the photo must be faked because his sartorial choices don't match his personal protocol for a London night out. It's entirely missing the point.
Which brings us to the core failure of the interview. It wasn't just the implausibility of the Pizza Express alibi or the sweating defense. It was the overall tone. Throughout the entire 50-minute broadcast, there was a glaring, almost total absence of empathy for the actual victims of Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, totally. When Maitlis asked him about his friendship with Epstein, he actually said he didn't regret it because the people he met and the opportunities he had to learn were actually very useful.
Useful? Wow.
He described his actions as unbecoming of a royal, framing his mistake as a breach of protocol rather than, an association with a monster.
But I have to ask, how does a royal communications team, a machine designed to protect the crown, let him go on camera with those answers? Did they not mock interview him?
You'd think they would have.
It's like realizing your boat is taking on water and deciding the absolute best solution is to grab a drill and put a second hole in the hole just to see if the water drains out.
It was a complete failure of the bubble. Inside the palace, his reality was never challenged. He likely believed his charm and his status would carry him through, as they always had.
But they didn't.
Not at all. The immediate fallout proved how wrong he was. The interview was a catastrophic miscalculation. During the broadcast itself, his former communications secretary, Jason Sine, who had reportedly advised against the interview, resigned. And the corporate world reacted instantly. Within days, hundreds of major companies, universities, and charities withdrew their support from his Pitch at Palace business initiative. He became entirely radioactive. The public backlash was so severe that Queen Elizabeth II was forced to intervene.
Right.
Within days of the broadcast, she gave him permission to step back from all public duties for the foreseeable future.
Which, as anyone who studies the monarchy knows, is the most polished royal euphemism possible for being firmly and unceremoniously removed from public life.
Oh, yeah.
He tried to win the court of public opinion, and he detonated his own reputation. But the real problem was that the PR disaster gave opposing lawyers everything they needed. He was now isolated, vulnerable, and the actual courts were coming for him.
Exactly. The interview might have destroyed his public standing, but it didn't solve his legal exposure. By 2021, Virginia Giuffre makes a massive legal move. She decides to take the fight directly to the federal courts in New York.
And the mechanics of how she was able to do this are really important. Normally, civil claims for abuse that happened in 2001 would be time-barred by the statute of limitations.
Right.
But New York State passed the Child Victims Act, which temporarily created a look-back window extending the statute of limitations for survivors of child sex abuse. It allowed them to file civil suits regardless of how much time had passed. Jeffrey used this window to file a formal civil lawsuit against Andrew in August 2021, seeking unspecified damages.
And Andrew's legal team throws everything they have at trying to get this dismissed before it reaches the discovery phase. They pull out a highly specific piece of paperwork, a 2009 settlement agreement that Jeffrey had made with Epstein in a Florida state court.
Right. They argued that the 2009 Epstein settlement contained a broad release clause that effectively shielded any potential defendants or third parties associated with Epstein. Andrew's lawyers essentially tried to use Epstein's old legal paperwork as a shield to block Jeffrey's new lawsuit.
But the strategy fails. In January 2022, federal judge Lewis Kaplan entirely rejects that argument. He rules that the 2009 agreement does not protect Andrew, and the case is going forward to trial.
That's huge.
Think about what that means for a senior royal. He is suddenly facing the very real prospect of being deposed under oath by hostile lawyers. He is facing the discovery process where his emails, travel logs, and financials could be subpoenaed. He's facing a public civil trial in an American court.
And the institution of the monarchy simply cannot allow that to happen. The risk of the Queen's son taking the stand in a sex abuse trial during her Platinum Jubilee year was an existential threat to the crown's dignity. So within a month of the judge's ruling, in February 2022, Andrew settles out of court.
The financial terms are officially confidential, but our sources show it was widely reported to be a staggering sum in the region of 10 to 12 million pounds.
That is a massive settlement.
And there are consistent reports that Queen Elizabeth II personally contributed a significant portion of the money to help him pay it.
The settlement included a substantial donation to Joffrey's charity, SR Speak Out, Act, Reclaim, which supports victims of sex trafficking. But we have to look very closely at the legal wording of the settlement statement. It was a masterpiece of legal needle threading. It contained absolutely no admission of guilt or liability from Andrew.
But it did contain a fascinating conception. The statement explicitly said that Andrew acknowledges that Virginia Giuffre is a victim of abuse, and he commends her bravery.
Exactly. So he is paying millions of pounds to a woman he went on national television to claim he had absolutely zero recollection of ever meeting.
Wild.
He is legally acknowledging she is a victim of abuse while simultaneously maintaining his complete innocence regarding that abuse. For Joffrey, it was a profound, if partial, victory. She extracted a massive financial penalty and a public acknowledgement, even if she didn't get the satisfaction of cross-examining him under oath.
But the financial settlement was just one half of the equation. The institutional reaction from the palace was the other half, and it was ruthless. The very same month the settlement was announced, Queen Elizabeth took formal, irreversible action.
Had to.
She stripped him of all his military affiliations, the honorary titles across the British armed forces that he prized so highly, and all his remaining royal patronages. She also announced he would no longer use the style His Royal Highness in any official capacity.
This begins what our sources refer to as the limbo years of managed severance. He is technically still the Duke of York, a title gifted at his wedding. He is technically still a prince by birthright, but he is a ghost within the institution.
Yeah.
From 2022 to 2025, he is confined largely to Royal Lodge, a massive 30-room Georgian mansion on the Windsor estate where he lives with his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson.
And this period of managed severance really highlights the duality of the monarchy. You have the family and you have the firm. Our sources mention a royal author, Hugo Vickers, who published a chronicle in 2026 claiming that Queen Elizabeth privately did not believe the allegations against her son.
Interesting.
She was deeply concerned by the association with Epstein, but she fundamentally believed Andrew's denials.
Which perfectly illustrates the tension. The Queen may have believed him as a mother, but as the sovereign, she had a duty to protect the institution. She authorized the stripping of his military honors and his removal from public life because the crown's survival always supersedes personal family loyalty.
Right.
The palace amputated the scandal and hoped that, confined to Royal Lodge, he would simply fade into obscurity.
They thought they had it contained. He was out of sight, he had paid the settlement, and the legal threat seemed to be neutralized. But they were wrong. Because as we move into 2025, the dam doesn't just crack, it completely breaks.
It breaks because of a profound human tragedy, immediately followed by an uncontainable paper trail from the United States.
In April 2025, the news breaks internationally that Virginia Giuffre has died by suicide at her home in Australia. She was only 41 years old.
It was a deeply shocking and profoundly tragic end for a woman who had spent the entirety of her adult life locked in a relentless fight for accountability against some of the most powerful men on the planet.
Yeah, it really was.
Her family released a statement that captured the weight of her struggle. They described her as a fierce warrior in the fight against sexual abuse, but also noted the impossible toll that lifelong fight took on her. She never stopped fighting, but the burden was immense.
The emotional shockwaves from her death were massive, and it refocused intense global anger back onto Andrew, and that anger was amplified tenfold just a few months later. In October 2025, Giuffre's posthumous memoir is published, titled Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice.
The book detailed her alleged encounters with Andrew in explicit, harrowing detail. She wrote about the psychological degradation of the trafficking network. She described Andrew acting as though having access to her was his birthright.
Just sick.
She wrote about feeling like a disposable toy, passed around by a network of men who believed their wealth and status made them untouchable.
Now, Andrew's representatives immediately issued statements vigorously denying everything in the book, reiterating that he never abused her. But public opinion doesn't always wait for legal verdicts. The visceral, emotional power of her posthumous words completely vaporized whatever microscopic shred of public standing he had left.
And as if the emotional weight of the memoir wasn't enough, the logistical foundation of his defense was simultaneously obliterated.
Here we go.
Right at the same time the memoir is published, the United States House Oversight Committee, led by Democrats pushing for transparency in the Epstein case, releases a massive new tranche of emails recovered from Epstein's estate.
And these emails are devastating because they directly, factually contradict the central pillar of his Newsnight defense. Remember, he looked Emily Maitlis in the eye and said he went to New York in December 2010 to break off the friendship, and from that specific trip forward, he was absolutely never in contact with Epstein again.
Well, the newly released emails prove that was categorically false. The correspondence between Andrew and Epstein continued significantly later than the Central Park walk. The email showed ongoing communication well into 2011.
Wow.
From a crisis management perspective, his credibility wasn't just damaged, it was fatal.
So the pressure on King Charles III, who is now on the throne following his mother's death, reaches an absolute boiling point.
Yeah.
The protective umbrella of the late Queen's long reign is gone. Charles is trying to establish his own modernized, slimmed-down monarchy, and he has this massive radioactive scandal chained to his ankle. He has to act.
And the action is swift and brutal. In late October 2025, Andrew clearly tries to get ahead of the executioner. He voluntarily offers to relinquish some of his remaining titles, putting out a statement about putting duty to the country first.
Right.
But King Charles refuses to let him manage his own exit. On October 30th, the palace announces that the king has formally stripped his younger brother of everything.
All remaining styles, titles, and honors. He is officially no longer a prince. He is no longer His Royal Highness. The institution reduces him to simply Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
It's a complete erasure.
And the public statement the palace released alongside this was remarkably cold. It stated, "These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him." They also explicitly stated their utmost sympathies remain with the victims of abuse.
And to complete the physical exile, Charles finally evicts him from the 30-room royal lodge. He is relocated to Wood Farm, a much smaller 5-bedroom property tucked away on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk.
The reaction from Jeffrey's family to the stripping of the titles was incredibly raw. Her brother, Sky Roberts, gave a tearful interview to the BBC saying, "This normal girl from a normal family has taken down a prince." But he also pointed out the limitation of royal censures. He said, he needs to be behind bars, period.
And I think we need to pause here and analyze the institutional threshold for exile. Why was this specific combination, the posthumous memoir and the email leak, the final straw for King Charles? Why wasn't the civil suit in 2021 or the multi-million-pound settlement in 2022 enough to trigger the complete stripping of the prince title?
Right. Because paying £12 million to a trafficking victim seems like a much bigger deal than sending an email in 2011. Is this reaction about a sudden moral awakening within Buckingham Palace, or is it just cold, hard PR calculus?
It is almost entirely institutional calculus. The palace's own statement holds the key. When they say the censures are necessary notwithstanding his denials, they are explicitly stating that legal guilt or innocence is no longer the primary metric.
Ah.
The association with Epstein, continually refreshed in the public mind by the emails and the memoir, had simply become mathematically intolerable for the crown to sustain. It wasn't about morality, it was an act of sheer institutional survival. They cut the limb off to save the body.
So as 2025 draws to a close, he is stripped of his royal armor. He is no longer a prince. He is living quietly in a farmhouse. And without that protective bubble of the crown, he is entirely exposed to the machinery of the state. Because across the Atlantic, the United States government has finally decided to open the vault completely.
The landscape shifts seismically with the implementation of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Passed under the Trump administration, this act compelled the U.S. Department of Justice to declassify and release millions of pages of documents related to the decades-long Epstein investigations.
Billions.
It was a bitterly contested legal process, heavily delayed by appeals and redaction requests, but the dam eventually burst.
In December 2025, the DOJ drops the first batch of hundreds of thousands of documents. And then on January 30th, 2026, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche announces the massive final package. We're talking roughly 3 million pages of testimony, flight logs, and financial records, alongside 2,000 videos and around 180,000 images.
And we have to widen the lens here for a second, because this release didn't just target Andrew. The Transparency Act laid bare the sheer, terrifying scope of Epstein's compromised network. The files named hundreds of prominent individuals across global politics and finance.
To give you an idea of the collateral damage, look at veteran British politician Peter Mandelson, a major figure who is currently serving as the UK ambassador to the United States under Labour Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Right.
He is completely ensnared. Mandelson is fired by Starmer after his name appears repeatedly in the files, including emails where he refers to Epstein as his best pal. Mandelson is subsequently forced to resign from the House of Lords and is actually arrested on suspicion of passing sensitive government documents to Epstein. It proves that Epstein wasn't just trafficking women, he was trafficking state secrets and influence.
But for Andrew, the files contain what investigators consider absolute smoking guns. The first major revelation was a series of emails from 2001 and 2002. They show correspondence sent from an account using the alias The Invisible Man, signing off simply with the letter A.
In these emails, A is coordinating directly with Ghislaine Maxwell, discussing arrangements to meet with what he explicitly describes as inappropriate friends.
Inappropriate friends.
It is incredibly damning language to have in writing.
Then, the DOJ released a newly unredacted photograph. It appears to show a man, widely identified as Andrew, kneeling over a fully clothed woman lying on the ground. Her face is obscured. The context of the image is entirely unknown, but its release prompted intense global scrutiny.
Naturally.
It escalated the political pressure so high that Prime Minister Keir Starmer took the deeply unusual, historically unprecedented step of publicly calling on Andrew to travel to Washington and appear before the U.S. Congress to answer questions.
But the photograph and the Invisible Man emails weren't what triggered the police raid. The most legally dangerous revelation in the entire 3 million-page dump involved his time as the UK's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment.
Right. Between 2001 and 2011, Andrew traveled the world ostensibly promoting British business. The DOJ files contained emails showing that in 2010 and 2011, Andrew appeared to be taking confidential official government reports about his trade envoy work and forwarding them directly to Jeffrey Epstein's inbox.
Let me break down the specific email that broke the case open. It's from November 2010. Andrew's then special advisor, Amir Patel, emails Andrew a confidential briefing document containing sensitive details about official state visits to Hong Kong, Vietnam, and Singapore. The metadata in the released file shows that exactly 5 minutes after receiving this confidential briefing from his advisor, Andrew forwards it directly to Epstein.
5 minutes. You receive a sensitive government intelligence document regarding international trade strategies, and you immediately bounce it to a convicted sex trafficker.
It's unbelievable.
This action crosses the line from unsavory personal behavior into a potential crime against the state. And this is the specific catalyst for the events of February 19, 2026.
So we are back to the farmhouse. It is his 66th birthday. Thames Valley Police, the regional force that covers the Windsor area and has jurisdiction to assess these specific allegations, makes their move. Plainclothes officers arrive at Wood Farm in unmarked vehicles. They arrest Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
A historic moment.
Simultaneously, search teams execute warrants at Wood Farm and his former residence, Royal Lodge, seizing computers, phones, and documents.
He is taken to Elsham Police Station in Norfolk. He is held in police custody, isolated in an interview room for 11 hours. When he is finally released late that evening, photographers catch a glimpse of him being driven away in the back of a car. He looks visibly slouched, gray, and entirely diminished.
The police statement confirms he's released under investigation, which, if you aren't familiar with the UK legal system, means he hasn't been formally charged with the crime yet, but he is emphatically not exonerated. The criminal investigation is active, ongoing, and he remains a formal suspect.
Our historical sources point out the sheer magnitude of this moment. It was the first arrest of a senior member of the British royal family since King Charles I was arrested during the English Civil War.
That is just... wow.
King Charles III responded to his brother's arrest with a single, painfully brief sentence released by the palace. The law must take its course.
It's a statement of studied, absolute neutrality. He essentially abandons his brother to the justice system. But I wanted to look very deeply at the specific crime he was actually arrested on suspicion of. Because, surprisingly, the initial arrest wasn't for sexual assault. The arrest was for paperwork. The charge is misconduct in public office, or MIPO.
Misconduct in public office is a fascinating, ancient, and highly complex area of UK common law. It carries a theoretical maximum sentence of life imprisonment, but the legal bar for prosecutors to actually secure a conviction is incredibly high, and it requires proving two very difficult elements.
Right, so explain how this works, because the first hurdle is proving he was actually a public officer. He was a royal volunteer, right? He wasn't an elected official or a salaried civil servant.
Yeah. That is exactly the battleground. The prosecution must prove that Andrew, in his role as a volunteer trade envoy, legally met the definition of holding a public office. A police source told The Times that there was always an internal debate over whether he wielded actual executive authority, signed official government papers, or if he just acted as a glorified ceremonial figurehead cutting ribbons.
Oh, I see.
If his lawyers can prove he was just a figurehead, the MIPO charge collapses.
But let's say they do prove he was a public officer. What's the second hurdle?
The second hurdle is proving the intent behind the action. Forwarding an email isn't inherently a crime. They have to prove that forwarding those confidential trade reports constituted a willful neglect of duty or a deliberate abuse of his position to such a degree that it warrants criminal punishment.
Okay.
And crucially, they will likely try to prove he did it for personal gain, perhaps attempting to impress Epstein to secure access to his financial networks or private jets.
It's a highly technical, difficult case to build, which is exactly why legal analysts in our sources suggest the arrest for MIPO was actually a strategic Trojan horse. It was the skeleton key the police needed to secure search warrants, seize his devices, and opened the door to start investigating much, much darker crimes.
Which is precisely what happens next. The investigation does not stay confined to leaked trade documents. In May 2026, Thames Valley Police issue a highly significant public update.
Assistant Chief Constable Oliver Wright steps in front of the cameras. He explicitly states that the police are concerned the public and potential witnesses might think the probe is narrowly focused just on trade reports. He clarifies that misconduct in public office is a broad umbrella offense.
Right.
It can encompass corruption, fraud, and crucially sexual misconduct and the abuse of a public position to facilitate sex trafficking offenses.
They explicitly confirm the investigation has expanded to include allegations of sexual misconduct. And you can see their investigative strategy shifting.
Yeah.
They aren't just looking at Andrew, they're looking at the apparatus that protected him. They take the extraordinary step of formally reaching out to former Royal Protection Officers.
These are the specialist armed officers from the Metropolitan Police whose literal job was to stand outside Andrew's door, travel with him, and protect him 24/7.
Exactly.
The police issue a public plea urging any of these former officers with information about sexual impropriety or strange movements to come forward.
And reports immediately emerged that these specific officers have been instructed to provide security for a dinner party at Epstein's New York residence back in 2010. The police want to know, what did those highly trained officers witness inside that townhouse? Did they see young women being brought in?
Right.
And if they did, why was it never reported up the chain of command?
Well,
It's a brilliant maneuver. You bypass the suspect who will continually deny everything, and you interrogate the people who were paid by the state to watch him.
And the net just keeps widening. The BBC uncovers an allegation regarding a woman in her 20s who was allegedly trafficked by Epstein specifically to travel to the UK and have a sexual encounter with Andrew. The police confirm they have established contact with this woman's lawyer.
There's also a completely separate, newer allegation that they incorporate into the probe involving inappropriate behavior with a woman at the Royal Ascot racing event in 2022.
Thames Valley Police are building a comprehensive behavioral profile spanning decades. They confirm they are working directly with the U.S. Department of Justice, channeling formal legal requests through the UK's National Crime Agency to get beyond the publicly released files and secure unredacted evidence, witness lists, and original hard drives.
They're also embedded with the Crown Prosecution Service to get early legal advice on what evidence will actually hold up in court.
It's exactly like pulling a loose thread on a sweater. You start with one technical question about a forwarded email regarding a trade mission to Vietnam, and suddenly you are unraveling a 2-decade-old tapestry of exploitation, institutional cover-ups, and elite enablement.
And it is going to be an agonizingly long process. The police updates make it abundantly clear that there is virtually no chance of a final decision on criminal charges being made before 2027. They have a duty to investigate thoroughly, and they are dealing with allegations that cross international borders, span decades, involve a suspect who vehemently denies all wrongdoing, and where the primary accuser is deceased.
So, as we look at the landscape today, in June 2026, where exactly does that leave Andrew Mountbatten Windsor?
He exists in a state of suspended animation, in a position without any modern precedent. By an unchangeable accident of constitutional law, he technically remains eighth in line to the British throne. Removing him from the line of succession would require a complex act of parliament, which hasn't happened.
Yeah.
But practically, socially, and institutionally, he is completely exiled. He has no titles, no military honors, no royal duties, and no public platform.
He is a private citizen living in almost total silence at Wood Farm. He hasn't given an interview, released a detailed statement, or been seen in public since his arrest in February. His spokespeople are totally silent. He is 66 years old, uncharged but under the crushing shadow of an expanding criminal investigation that threatens to consume whatever is left of his life.
And the collateral damage to his family and the institution is profound. His daughters, princesses, Beatrice and Eugenie, are forced to navigate their own lives under this cloud. His ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, is dealing with serious health battles while sharing his isolation.
right.
And the reputational damage to the British monarchy is incalculable. Commentators across our sources call it the worst crisis in the modern era because it doesn't just enmesh the institution with poor judgment or financial scandal.
Yeah.
It links the crown directly to serious, systemic sexual crime.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Let's step back and recap the sheer magnitude of this trajectory. We have witnessed a fall that is almost Shakespearean in its scope. We started with a hero of the realm, a man who flew helicopters into combat zones, who possessed a level of privilege most people can't even comprehend.
Yeah.
And we watched As his primary defense, his absolute untouchable status slowly evaporated until he was reduced to a suspect in a Norfolk police station.
And at the center of all this legal maneuvering, we cannot forget the tragic irony that anchors this story. Virginia Giuffre, the woman who sparked this global reckoning, who faced immense public pressure, who endured smears and legal hurdles for years, did not live to see the arrest she spent her life fighting for.
No, she didn't.
Her posthumous memoir stands as her final testament, a record of a woman who felt failed by powerful institutions at every turn, but who forced them to act anyway.
It leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to mull over. We've seen the crown survive this crisis so far. By ruthlessly amputating the infected limb, the king cut his brother loose to save the monarchy. But does true justice actually exist when the primary accuser is gone? And the suspect's entire defense relied so heavily on the sheer awe of his social status.
It's a profound question about the nature of accountability. Consider what it means for victims globally if the ultimate untouchable figure is eventually charged and convicted, not just for the alleged physical abuses themselves, but for leveraging the literal machinery of the state misconduct in public office to impress and enable a trafficker.
Exactly. If a prince of the blood can ultimately fall to the mundane paperwork of his own bureaucracy, what does that mean for the rest of Epstein's hidden network? We started this deep dive talking about that fortress. The idea that if you were born behind the gates of Buckingham Palace, you are wrapped in tradition and shielded from consequences. But as we look at the reality of that Norfolk farmhouse today, it's clear the fortress wasn't breached from the outside. It was dismantled from within, by choices made decades ago, until there was absolutely nothing left to hide behind.